administrators with tenure, and so we, as an additional gift to you, we're going to do that first, so that if you need to take home to do some work or take care of your families, you can. I'll just say a brief word about all four of them, but in general, they are four of the most consummate professionals I have ever had the pleasure to work with. First of all, Kathy Connolly, the principal of East School, who unfortunately can't be here tonight because her son is in a state hockey championship, and she's driving up there tomorrow. Big deal for them. It's with great pleasure that I recommend Mrs. Connolly for tenure. She is energetic, a problem solver, a team player of the consummate level. She's one of the people, and there are a few others here tonight, who if I emailed her at 2 o'clock on a Sunday at 2:05, I get an answer. She works tirelessly to improve everything for students at East. She's responded well to whatever has happened, including cars through playgrounds and various other things that happen in the course of her principal's day. She's really worked hard to cultivate community at East and to really be responsive to parents. She's created some really nice cultural events there that I think the school community has really responded to, and she's been an excellent instructional leader. So it's with great pleasure that I recommend to the Board of Education tenure for Kathleen Connolly. Our next tenure candidate is Julia Lang Shapiro, our Director of Media, Visual, and Performing Arts, a title I still can't quite get out without reading it. And Julia truly is an all-encompassing director of the arts. I've worked with several arts directors in my career, and she's by far the best. She manages staff and budgets and business. People don't realize what goes into being a director of arts. There's music lessons and instrument rentals and sheet music purchases. It's not just managing people and programs. And she does it all with a smile on her face and again with a generosity of spirit. She contributes to all of our district committees. She's an active member of our administrative council. She's just an all-around great person to work with. She's improved our programs at the high school tremendously, and I look forward to many more years of her doing the same. She's also gotten herself involved in the community. She's been named Long Beach Woman of the Arts for one of the local ones for this year. And I know that she will continue to be a great asset to our district. So again, with great pleasure, I recommend Mrs. Julia Lang Shapiro to the Board of Education for tenure. Also tonight, we recommend Mr. Sean Murray for tenure in his position as Director of Elementary Curriculum Instruction and Assessment. Sean is the first administrator I met when I came to Long Beach. Well, the first one after I was hired, I should say. And when the outgoing assistant superintendent was unavailable to take me on a building tour, Sean graciously jumped in and introduced me to all of the buildings in Long Beach and really gave me such a wonderful, encapsulated view of the strengths of our community. He has worked tirelessly with our coaching teams. He works well with our elementary principals. We've created some of the most beautiful elementary curriculum of any district that I've seen. Sean is always at the forefront of the latest research. He's participated in some units, very cutting-edge units of inquiry that we've created at the district level. He's also currently our director of ENL for the lower, for elementary, and really actually is the point person for ENL for almost our whole district. Shares a lot of the new regulation changes and goes to all of the coordinator meetings and shares with us all the important ENL information that we need to know. Sean is an excellent administrator, an innovative thinker, and a team player and a pleasure to work with. So again, I'm happy to recommend for tenure, Mr. Sean. Finally, I'm thrilled to recommend for tenure Mr. Paul Romanelli, our middle school principal. When I came to Long Beach, I heard that there was an awesome dynamic middle school principal there, and having been a middle school principal, I was glad to hear that. And Paul has exceeded any possible explanation. Paul's one of those people that almost never sits down with me and doesn't say, I have an idea. And those ideas come to fruition in a way that's positive and inclusive. He has built an enormous sense of trust and community at the middle school. I see the admiration his teachers have for him every day. He is an amazing leader. He handles crises with compassion and energy. He knows exactly the right touch in terms of communicating with parents and students. He is an excellent instructional leader. He really models where we need to go in Long Beach in terms of best practices in education. And he brings that to our administrative team as well. He is a leader who I have great respect for and really listen to, both as the interim superintendent and my sister to myself. I really, I say to people all the time, middle school is one of our crown jewels in Long Beach, and I really think he's one of the finest educational leaders I've ever worked with, and I enthusiastically recommend him for tenure. So I would like to ask the board to consider item A, certificate of personnel. Motion. Second.
What? I will do all at once, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do it.
All at once. And is there any discussion on this motion? Yes.
Before tenure is awarded, I always make a statement. That's the seriousness of tenure. To get a lifetime appointment is a wonderful benefit. Not many professions is that given. And when the Board of Education decides to give tenure on the recommendation of the superintendent and whoever the supervisors are, it's a very responsible decision because we're putting our trust in you in terms of not only now, but in terms of the future. And we're entrusting our children with you, and we're expecting that you're going to continue the standards that you've set during this probationary period well into your days here in Long Beach, many you decide to stay, however you determine how long you're going to stay, and we hope you all stay a long time. But that is a very serious charge. I just want to add to what Dr. Gallagher said on some of the cases. Mr. Romanelli, I've been here 40 years, probably longer than anybody in the room in terms of this school district. And it's very unusual for me to meet a principal, or it's very unusual for me not to get a complaint about a principal. It's very common for me to approach parents and say, well, what do you think? How do you like them? How do you like her? Should they get tenure? Central administration doesn't like it when board members do this. But I feel it's a responsibility entrusted to me by people who elect me. So I too want to second what the superintendent said. You've been a breath of fresh air, and I have called you a rock star, because that's basically what you've been in this community. You've buried a child, and you did it like nobody else could. You kept abreast of technology and trying to keep us ahead of the curve, which, considering somebody like myself, is no small task, and we're grateful for that. We enjoy your sense of humor. The relationship you have with the high school principal only makes both buildings stronger, and I think principals and staff see that and appreciate that, and the Board of Education certainly does. You're here countless hours above and beyond for things beyond the middle school. You're here for awareness, you're here for meetings, you're here for the elementary schools, you'll be down 5th grade meetings. I mean, it's certainly complimentary to you, and now to us that you're a member of our team, so I too want to congratulate you. Yesterday I attended the PTA luncheon over at East School, and Mrs. Conley was there, and she asked me, what do you think? I said, well, I'm kind of disappointed I wasn't asked to speak. And I only wanted to be asked to speak because I knew she wouldn't be here tonight, and I knew her teachers wouldn't be here tonight because she was not going to be here. I only wanted to speak to thank her for her contributions to East School, and I wanted to do it in a public forum. So she said, oh, you should have said something to me. I said, well, I'm a guest, and this is your party, it's not mine. But I did want to say that, and to your teachers that were grateful for you. When she first came, she presented herself as a team player. She was a basketball player as an undergraduate, so she gets the concept of team, and she's built that concept at East. So we're grateful. We're sorry that she's not with us tonight, but hopefully she'll get up to Buffalo without snow and enjoy her son's hockey game and come back with the trophy. Mr. Murray, it's not easy to take over a new job, and that's exactly what you did. You left East in very good shape for your successor, and leadership is always about followership. So I think the people at East were grateful for that. We as a board certainly were and are. You've done a great job with all the madness that comes down with this, from the state in terms of assessment and Common Core, and you always do it in a gentle way. You don't get panicked, you know it's going to get taken care of, and you project a sense of confidence that we're very, very grateful for. So we congratulate you, and we're glad you're still here. And Ms. Lang Shapiro, it wasn't easy filling the shoes of your predecessor. I myself had concerns about a non-music person taking over the department, and I think others had that concern. But you've built all the departments to a stronger place. It's not easy because it demands community involvement. You have to keep the parents happy. You have to keep the community happy. Also being split among buildings. You know, to be in one building and another, and to have children and staff in all those buildings is no easy task. But according to the superintendent, you do that in sort of a graceful, in competent and professional way, and we're sort of grateful for that. So we can commend you as well. Thank you.
Okay, I'll call for a vote. Mrs. Taggy?
Yes.
Mrs. Verona?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Bada?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Is cake over there, so take your slice and go.
You're welcome to stay for the budget portion of the meeting.
Asked us to break that out into a different function code. Human resources and curricular development. Okay?
Dr. Ryan, do you have
What I'm proposing at this and we have yeah.
Is it easier if we ask questions as you go through the
Yes.
slide, or is it easier to wait till the end?
As we go through it.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Abner?
Yeah. Everybody has one? Everybody good? Okay. So our proposed budget is 139 million, which is an increase of 2.84%. However, and this is my big however, because the budget evolves. About next week is really going to be that I'm asking for the budget to go up 3.47%. However, the tax levy I'm proposing is the same. So this proposed tax levy of about 102.5 million, or an increase of 3.47%, is the same. Whether I talk about the detailed budget, that goes up 2.84%, which is the copy that I had given to the board on Friday, last Friday, so they have a chance to review it. Or what I'm going to be talking about next week, where I'm going to say, you know what, board, I need to go up to 3.47, just coincidence, that's the same number, 3.47% for the budget, and I'm going to tell you why. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a preview so that as I explain tonight, people don't say, but wait a second, last week you said the budget was going to go up 2.84%. Why all of a sudden in 1 week is it going up to 3.47? But I'll explain that. Total projected state aid, I'm estimating at about 23.4 million. And unfortunately, our foundation aid, which is not expenditure based, is only going up 0.18%, which is not much at all. 42,000 compared to 23.4 million. Everything else that I'm going to talk about with state aid, we're only going to be getting a little bit more because we're spending more. We're going to be getting a little bit more in BOCES because we're spending more in BOCES. We're going to get a little bit more in building aid because we're doing some more building.
Michael, that's about the only page I have questions.
Okie doke.
So is the, on that first part, total 2018-19 proposed budget, is it gonna be 139,171,680, but that equals 3.47%, or is it gonna be a different number? It's gonna be a higher number?
It's going to be a high number.
Okay.
All right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, okay, so my question was, why is it just so happens that this year, the 3.47% increase that you're gonna explain next week, and the proposed tax levy is increasing by 3.47%. Why don't those numbers always match?
Good question. Because our base, when we take what's the increase to the budget, we're starting at 135 million, right? This is going up to 2.84%, but our tax levy is 135 million. It's a little bit under 100 million. So when you have a different base, when you add a certain amount of money to it, the percentage is going to change. Okay? And it's easier to see that when I go through a more detailed slide. But it's just a different base.
Okay, and I have one other question.
Uh-huh.
I read some time ago, and I have the article there if you want the date. Newsday said, I think, said our state aid was gonna go up 3.33%, which I think, I figured out was $692,000. And yet you're telling us that it's only going up 42,566.
So if I can just ask you to hold that question when I get to that slide, because it's a little bit easier.
I thought it was on this side.
No, this was just the headline.
Oh, okay.
Okay, this was just the headline.
Sorry.
That's okay. All right. So what I have here in the next 5 slides are all of our areas of the budget broken out by function. I'm not going to go through each one. This is here for everybody just to see what the budget looks like as a snapshot of the whole budget broken out by function. And as you may remember, I've been going through each function that I said we were going to review this year, something that maybe we didn't do the year before that. I try to cycle through the functions so that every couple of years we have a chance to go into some detail. Like I'm not going into the detail on 1010 or 1040 or 1060. We had done that within the last couple of years. But I am going to go through tonight a little bit about 1310, 1345, 1430, and 2010. Okay? Where I have updated progress, because that's what I'm going to talk about next week. All right? We're going to talk about next week, we're going to talk about legal. We're going to talk about insurance. We're going to talk about some changes that I made to programs with disabilities, because I had another meeting with our special ed staff and got a little bit more information from them. So I'm able to do some adjustments from where we presented at the March 8th meeting. And I'm also going to talk about supervision regular school 2020 next week. Last week I already did attendance, psychological service, social worker service. Right? I should put here also, here it is, co-curricular. I'm going to talk about that at the next presentation as well. Okay, so I've highlighted those that's still to come. But I did want to give the board and everybody who's here a little bit of a snapshot of where are we today? Where are we today in the budget? Okay? A couple of weeks ago, actually maybe it was a couple of months ago, I did all of transportation, right? And I did the benefits when we started talking about the budget, because I had that information already. So I covered all of these. What's in green is a reduction, and the reason why I say green, because the reduction for us, technically is a good thing when you can try to reduce costs. Now, we don't always want to reduce things because reduction sometimes means reduction in program. But for us here, when it comes to some decreases in the benefits, it's always a good thing because it has nothing to do with the program. And then at the next meeting, I'm also going to talk about transfer to other funds. So without giving too much away and what I'm going to talk about next week, here's the budget, right? So you have a base of 135.3 million. If you add 3.8 million to that, that's an increase of 2.84. If you add 3.8 million to 100 million, that's the other number. It's a lot more than 2.8. It's pretty close to 3.8 million, right? If you were to add 3.8 to 100,000, that's 3.8%. To 135, excuse me, to 100 million. But to 135 million, it's 2.84, different base. Okay, here's just a little bit of a preview of next week. So I'm going to talk about transfer to capital. I'm going to talk more about our capital projects next week, but I did get some legal advice over the course of this past few days where they said, if we're going to use, and I talked about this when I did capital projects presentation several times, if we're going to use money that's in our capital fund, not our capital reserve fund, but our capital fund, to do different projects, we actually have to add it into the budget. So we're going to create a separate budget line item called unused prior transfer to capital for facilities. Because even though the board had approved it once already, they approved it for a specific purpose. We're not doing that purpose. We didn't do it 5 years ago. We didn't do it 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whenever that was allocated. And it's been sitting in our capital fund. Now I want to use it. Why? I want to use it for a couple of really important reasons. I'd like to use it to replace the auditorium seats and carpeting at Lindell, because we all know what happens when you go and sit there for anything and the seats creak and the handles fall off and the seat backs are wearing, and we've replaced it and we've repaired it in its time, and it costs money. I also want to create a new culinary arts classroom at the high school. All right, have it state-of-the-art to rival BOCES, so we don't have to send our high school kids to BOCES anymore, and at a certain period of time, perhaps it might even break even or pay for itself, because we won't have to pay that tuition. But more importantly, we get to build up that program. And you know, it's two really good reasons to use that money. So we do, and we will have to add that in, but that wasn't really the purpose of tonight. But that's the preview, and I'm giving it to you preview because when I keep talking about this budget, I don't want people to be surprised next week when that number changes by $855,000. But I don't have to change the tax levy. It has no impact on the tax levy because we already have that money. It's really like a bookkeeping and accounting thing that I have to do. We already have the money. I just need the board to approve that money for the new purpose. Revenue. So, Mrs. Brony, you had asked about state aid. You see here's a change of 1%. Yes, in the paper it did say it was going to go up 3%. But I don't agree with the numbers that were in the newspaper. I don't agree with what was compared between our current, they viewed as our current revenue, and what they say is our projected revenue. I think they overstated BOCES. I think they overstated special ed. And I know that they overstated our building aid, because I know that we haven't done that much in emergency projects to generate that kind of aid. So what I did do was I added an extra 200,000 because I do think we are going to get 200,000 more in transportation aid. Our ratio changed. It used to be around 6%, now it's around 8%. So I feel that that transportation number is a real number. That 42,566 is the number for our increase in foundation aid. I think that's a real number. Okay? Other revenue. We are expecting to get a few more students from Island Park next year. Some students are going to leave who are graduating as seniors this year. We're going to get a new freshman class. The net is a few more students. So I estimate that in round numbers at 80,000. Everything else, as a whole, is going to stay basically the same. Certain categories are going to go up, certain categories are going to go down, but I'm comfortable with our estimate of about 80,000 more. This is the big news, the LIPA pilot. I don't have a good explanation, except that if I take a look at what LIPA was assessed at in our current year, and what it was assessed at last year, and what it's projected to be assessed at next year, they're going to give us more money. It's hard to get some answers about the whole LIPA pilot situation. I've tried for a couple of months now. But they sent us a notice. They said we're going to get another $725,000, so it's here, which is great for us because it's more revenue for us to offset our costs. Tax levy. What I did very basically was I said, this I think is a realistic estimate for state aid. This is a realistic estimate for other revenue, which is our tuition and other revenue income that we get. This is what they tell us we're going to get in a pilot. What else do we need to support our budget? 7%. This is, again, the first time that we don't have to rely on any of our fund balance, of any of our reserve funds. And I'll say that word once only tonight. This is a sustainable budget. Okay? Now, What happens, again, the preview next week, so you understand the context? Look, this number went up by 855,000, but the tax levy didn't go up because we have this money. This is the transfer from the capital fund, not the capital reserve fund that we need voter approval for that's on the agenda today, but money we have in the capital fund that wasn't spent over the course of about 20 years. You bundle all that money together, what's left? 855,000. What am I proposing to do with it? I want to build a new culinary arts program for the high school, and I want to repair and replace the seats and the carpeting at Lindell for the board's approval, but that's my recommendation.
Michael?
Yeah.
If on the off chance that Newsday was right, and we get 600 and change in state aid as opposed to the 242 that's on there, would that decrease the tax levy?
Only if you wanted to. Okay? I'm just saying, that is your choice, right? That is your choice. You could also say, you know what, I want to do something $200,000 more of something. In this budget, and again, that's next week's presentation, I have $400,000 as a line item to put into a new capital reserve fund. All right, that's another item on the agenda tonight, is to create a new capital reserve fund, because we can't fund the one we have anymore. It has a 10-year lifespan. So I am saying that you may want to say, I know I have other capital needs in this district. Okay, we've had capital project presentations. We have a board subcommittee on capital projects. There's other things that we want to do. Maybe you don't want to go out for a bond. You know, maybe you don't want to have to go through all of that, and you squirrel away a little bit each year, and then you have enough money to do with something that you need to do. And we've talked about the fact that 4 years' time, we may want to consider building a new transportation building. It's going to cost about $4 million. We don't have that. So what you may say is if state aid, new projection shows another 200,000, you may say, you know what, I want to increase the budget by 200,000, and I'm going to use that extra 200,000 in state aid to put more money in my capital reserve fund so that I'm closer to that goal of building that new transportation building, because we need it, because it needs to be ripped down. Or you may say, no, I'm going to keep the budget as is, and I'm going to reduce the tax levy. That's the board's choice. That's part of your main role as a board, is deciding what the budget should be and what the tax levy should be.
Is tonight the night you talk about the effects of not going to the max on the tax cap?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so you're going to do that at a later?
Yes, it is. Okay. So this is the two versions. This is based on how you paid for the projects that I had talked about and what I gave to the board last week. And then this one brings in that $855,000. Budget goes up, tax levy doesn't. This is an explanation of what I just talked about, okay? Let's focus on this last point. Although the maximum tax levy pursuant to the tax cap is 4.1%, we only need to levy an additional 3.47 to support the total proposed increase in costs without the use of fund balance. So what does that really mean? It means that we have the ability under the tax cap to stay within the cap. We could go to 4.1%. What happens if we don't go? We lose that money and we lose it out of our base. Now, this is a board choice. The board could decide where to set that tax levy, but there's always a danger. Okay, and what I talked about previously, and I'll mention it again, the only reason we can get to that 4.1% above the 2% is a combination of two main factors. The fact that we're doing some capital projects that give us an exemption, it allows us to levy more, because the tax cap is really supposed to parallel our general operating budget. So if a district is going to do some capital project that costs $500,000, the tax cap formula allows you to levy an additional $500,000. All right? Really, the levy is supposed to contain operations. It's supposed to contain the day-to-day and not have them skyrocket out of sight. But it's not supposed to penalize a district that needs to do certain capital projects. So we can say, you know what? We're going to go to a 2%. Some people still think in their mind that the 2% tax cap is always at 2%. It isn't. But then you lose that $2 million, because 2% of $100 million or close to that is $2 million, and you lose it out of your base. Okay? There may be a year, whether it's next year or the year after that, that things are tough. and we don't have a tax-based growth factor that I talked about previously, and we don't have capital projects, and we're stuck at 1%. What happens if we're stuck at 1% to stay within the cap, and because of our contractual increases, we have to go up 1.5%? What happens if a benefit, a pension fund, or a health insurance fund comes in, and it's again over 1% or over 2%? Then you have to dig into fund balance again. So this is one of those really tough situations that a board has to figure out is, where are we going to set the levy? What are we comfortable leaving on the table in terms of tax revenue? What is going to be something that the community can understand, and understand that we're not overtaxing the community, we're taxing what's needed. So what I had said to you as a board is, I had said, I'm not asking you to go to 4.1, okay? I'm just asking you to set the levy at a point where we're sustainable, where we're not tapping into fund balance anymore. But you could say to me, you know what? That's okay, put 200,000 into appropriated fund balance. It's something I can live with, and bring down the levy. But you don't have to gain that back, right? And then you have to keep, if that's gonna support your operations, you gotta make sure you have 200,000 in there every year. Yes?
But already, to bring the tax levy down to 3.47, we've basically given away
$100,000.
$1,000 because we won't get, that won't be part of our base in
That's
the
correct.
coming years.
That's correct.
So we've already made that.
Right. So in the past, Mrs. Rona, we've had a similar presentation, and I had a conversation with a board member. And I said to that board member, we were, I think, at about a 3.7, still within the cap. And there was some discussion about lowering the cap. And I had advised against it, and I had advocated against it. And I said, don't go below the 3.7, which at that point was our cap number, because you don't want to leave money on the table. But in that time, we were also using fund balance. So I have a little more of a luxury where I can say, without using any fund balance, just using my estimates for state aid and other revenue, this is where I'm comfortable, 3.47, because that's sustainable for us. That covers our costs, and it allows us to do the capital projects that I'm going to talk more about next week. But that's why I'm comfortable, and why I'm in a little different position than I was several years ago. Okay, what I had given the board on last Friday was a bunch of slides that talk about all 4 of those central areas: business office, purchasing, human resources, and curriculum development. I am not going to go through each one, okay? They're there for the board's reference, all right? They're there for the public if you have questions. We have next week, and we have April 12th. We have 2 other meetings before we adopt the budget, and I'm always available if you want to ask a question, okay? Email me, call me, or you're more than welcome to come in and meet with me if you have a specific question. They're there really to inform you and to illustrate, but I'm just going to take you through the process. So what I start off with is I have a general slide that has the total for the function. So this is the total business administration, A1310, actual expenses from 15-16, actual expenses from 16-17. So you have 2 years of history. You have the original budget for the current year, and you have what we're proposing for next year. And you see the dollar variance, and you see the percent variance. And then supplies, the summary, a 0.5, and then an example of a line item, okay? Supplies for sending out RFPs, requests for bids. Human resources, okay? Why is there a significant difference in the salary here? More than just step on the new salary schedule, is there was a staff member in attendance that used to be split among a couple different other functions. She used to help out more significantly with the superintendent's office and also with the district clerk. But really, to reflect realistically our reality, she really works fully in HR. So we're showing that as a more of an accurate reflection of her time, and that's why that goes up. All right, so more specifics about the salaries and a line-by-line example. Here's the clerical. Again, you see here the 13% increases because it's not so much that there's a 13% raise, but because that time on that salary is shifted over to this office. Okay, the next and the last one is curriculum development. Okay, you see here, the only changes here are really in the personnel category. The 2%, again, basically just step on a new salary schedule. However, excuse me, I want to take that back. The proposed budget here, there is a few offsets. In the previous year, and this I want to spend a moment on here. In the previous year, the math coach was paid out of a grant. Okay, I don't know if we're going to pay it out of a grant next year. It's in the budget. Okay, the release time for the IB coordinator and the MYP coordinators have been taken out of the budget. They are no longer getting release time next year, so that's a decrease. And then those offset the typical step salary increases for curriculum development. Who does this include? It includes our curriculum directors, and it includes the Office of the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction. So you have a bunch of different things going on there, some changes in the way we have our staff assigned, and the changes in way we're going to cover something in a grant or not. So this is worthy of spending a few moments on. And then that line by line, it shows you the impact of that grant by not covering that math coach in the grant any longer. Equipment is level, vendor services are level, and supplies is level. The budget process. These are the last two slides, and just what I'd like to say here is that as we go through the budget cycle, there are going to be times when we make changes because either we find out about staff who are retiring before we adopt, or we just have discussions, whether it's with the board or amongst ourselves. Okay, so you'll see here a decrease between the February 8th and the March 8th of $106,000 in total staff salaries in the teaching line. And that's just part of the process. We did find out about another retirement. I think there were 2 retirements that we didn't have in the February 8th, and so we updated our data. So, you know, you try to give current data at the time when you do the presentation, but sometimes things change. And what I'm going to do at the night of the adoption is I will highlight where there were changes between the first slide that we talked about a topic and where we are at adoption, so that everybody's clear. I won't be introducing much new information on the night of the adoption. I'm just going to review some of the highlights. Okay, I thank you for your attention, and I'll have time for questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Vito. Any questions from the board?
I have a couple of questions.
Okay, Doug.
Thank you, Mr. DeVito. I just had a couple of questions. One is, you know, this process seems just to accelerate as the calendar goes by. So I just wanted to harken back to, I think, three meetings ago, when we talked about transportation. And we didn't come to any resolution at that point in terms of the, whatever savings would be realized if this one-stop rule was put into effect. We didn't come to any conclusion in terms of if we did some kind of alternative busing, in terms of possibly using the city of privatizing that, in terms of whatever, some other bus service running than what we presently have. So, do we have those numbers in terms of that if in fact the one-stop rule was put into effect, we'd know what we'd be realizing?
So,
And when do we make that decision? Because I get the feeling that parents need to know some of these things sooner rather than later.
sure, I'm happy to review that with everybody. So when I did that presentation, I said that that particular point about moving just to one alternate, I said it's not really a budget savings, but it's really about making for a smoother operation. So that's why there is a decision that the board has to make, but it doesn't necessarily have to be tied in with the budget. It's really an operational decision. And when I talked about using public transportation, I said that's something to consider in the future. I think that was either number 4 or number 5, about leveraging some of the city buses. That's a longer conversation. That's not for this year either. But I would like the board, and I would like to get back to the board by the next meeting to give them a timetable about when they really should make that decision in terms of limiting alternates.
Okay. I also had a question, you know, I sort of raised it last meeting, and I'd like to have further discussion on it in terms of the expenditure of a psychologist at Nike. You know, I've certainly given thought about that since the last meeting, and I have serious concerns about the educational and therapeutic benefits of such allocation. So, will that have to wait until next, or before we adopt? So it'd either be next meeting or the meeting thereafter.
Yeah, it could be in either one of those 2 meetings, and we can take direction from the board as to when you'd like to have that discussion.
And my last point concerns robotics. I had raised the issue of robotics. Somehow I had heard the word a couple of years ago and wasn't quite sure what we were doing. And then I was informed by administration that we need to get the recommendation from, I guess the departments, I guess STEM in this case. I see that Locke has been doing some work in terms of robotics, but I don't think the rest of the district in terms of the robotic program is anywhere near where it should be compared to other school districts. And I'd be curious in terms of what appropriation we might need to make in such regard to somehow bring us closer to where we need to be in terms of this, because it's what you're reading about other districts, and the only thing I read about this district is Locke in terms of robotics.
So I appreciate the question, Dr. Ryan, and we did have a chance, Dr. Gallagher, Dr. McNally, and I met with the high school's administrative staff. We talked about co-curriculum in anticipation of next week's presentation, and we raised the issue of robotics. And the recommendation of the high school administration is they feel it's something that may be appropriate at the middle school level, but it's not something that they'd like to really take on at the high school. Dr. Gallagher, if you want to elaborate, please do.
So I think it's not that they don't want to take it on, I just think that they feel that it's not something they can do next year. And Mr. Harvey, you're an expert in this too, so you can jump in if you want to correct me. Robotics at the high school level requires a dedicated space where equipment can be maintained and students can work on equipment during the week. That's a big concern at the high school. Space is tight. It certainly is something that we can do, but it probably involves renovation and equipment purchase and then, training of staff around that. So I think next year would be our planning year for that, and we're hopeful that a new technology director would be able to lead the way in that as well. And in terms of the middle school, I think that they're actually doing a good deal of robotics, so I think that we're progressing through the grades, and I think that the middle school students are actually involved in robotics in their technology classes. We introduced Girls Who Code there this year, so the high school students will be ready for it, and I think we have that on our agenda to do. It just can't really, I don't think it's a budget allocation for next year, but the following year.
We spend the entire second semester working with robotics, which starts off in the second quarter with computer programming. So the second quarter, students are learning computer programming, which is how how a robot functions. Then the second semester, they actually start designing and building their robots. Then they're able to transfer that knowledge that they've gained through the computer programming and actually program their robots. At this point, we're at the process where they're beta testing their robots through what's called the teleoperated robots, which means that they can use them with a remote control. Our next step is to remove the remote control and have them run autonomously, which means that they're going to design code on the computer, download it to the robot, and then the robot will function autonomously through the sensors. That might be proximity sensors, pressure sensors, color sensors, rotational sensors to complete a task. And that's going on in the technology curriculum. And next year, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I believe Mr. Romanelli's goal is to have every student have access to that. In addition, there's also a club which uses a different brand that has access to the first competition, which is what some districts like to go to, whereas in the curriculum within the classroom, we use a product called VEX, which is what more districts use at the middle school level, and then they can compete locally.
Well, it's good to hear, and I appreciate that. It was well over my head. But I just want to say that I just regret the fact that we may be another year behind. I'm hoping that's not the case, and maybe I'm exaggerating, but I just hope that we catch up if in fact we are in arrears and we do what needs to be done to make us competitive.
Thank you.
And it's good to hear about robotics because it has not been on anybody's radar in terms of this public forum since I don't know when. Thank you.
I do apologize. The district's advertisement who does the newsletter?
Public relations.
Public relations did come to me earlier in the year, but the unit had not yet started, so I'll be calling them back in probably in the next week or two. And for timing, this year's 7th grade, which was introduced to robotics last year, 6th graders. So we'll have 6th, 7th, 8th graders all introduced by the end of next year. So the timing could work well if the program is up and running in the year 2 at the high school. It would actually be a perfect transition if next year's planning for the high school.
Okay, thank you.
Well, you do, Dr. Rose, I have some extracurricular comments to make as well. I find this, one more time, I find that, not for this high school crowd, and it seems to happen on so many different levels that it is, I know I've said it up here a half dozen times that the kids that are currently in the high school are just being written off, and we're just going to say, well, we need to start at elementary, or we need to start at the middle school, or, oh, well, too bad for them that they're the guinea pigs with Common Core, or I could go on and on and on, and I just find it very upsetting. However, with respect to, I'm not just talking, when I was talking about extracurriculars last week, I was not just talking about the robotics club. I have a 3-page memo here from the high school about clubs that were not permitted to be formed because, for instance, they could take a forensics club, which there was a lot of interest in, couldn't be formed because the kids could take a forensics course. Well, now that I have a high schooler in the 11th grade, I can tell you it's not so easy to just schedule a forensics course. These kids are going without lunch. They're crazy schedules, so it's not so easy. And yet, the IB Dance Club, which was supposed to be formed, now all of a sudden, I read in the Herald that we have an IB Dance Club. So there's something's not smelling right to me. Some clubs get to be formed and some clubs don't get to be formed. I would just like a really clear idea. And if, as this 3-page memo from the high school from last summer, so I'm sure there's been additions to it since then, if this, which expresses student interest in extracurricular clubs, this is what I'm talking about. I'm saying if somebody comes to us and says, I want a dance club and I have 20 other kids who want to do it with me, I want to say, okay, go for it. And that does not require a special room, and it doesn't require special equipment or whatever we're talking about for the robotics club. So this is far larger than robotics.
So can I just respond to that? All of those other clubs are in this proposal. All of the student-generated interest clubs that we spoke about that are in that memo that the high school said last week they want are in this budget.
Well, I wish you'd say that before I went on. Okay, all right, well, thank you for your presentation. What I just said is very true, but thank you, I appreciate it. But that brings me to my next point. We have tonight's meeting, which is a budget meeting. We have the meeting March 22nd, a week from tonight, which is a budget meeting. And then our next meeting, we're going to adopt the budget. So we need, administrative team, we need all information about the budget to be in next week's budget. Because people sitting out here, or people watching the video, or people reading newsletters from the high school and the middle school are going to be hearing, if, for instance, there's going to be more clubs, or there's going to be less stops on, just assuming for a moment that that was something we were going to decide.
Fewer stops.
Okay, there are going to be fewer stops. I know that 4 years ago now, I ran for the board because the night before the budget adoption, there was a proposal to cut extracurriculars at the middle school by 20%. It was at 11 o'clock at night, the night before budget adoption, and that is just not fair to the community. So my request to each of you, and particularly, I'm sorry, mostly President Mr. DeVito, is that whatever we're going to do and whatever changes we're going to make, we need to have those in place by March 22nd so that we can get that information out and people will at least have time. They won't have time to come to a board meeting and share their views, but they'll at least have time to email the board or email you or however.
So I agree with Mrs. Cronin. That's why when I said at the beginning that this presentation, in terms of when I had all of the functions I had tonight, when in the past, we would do something like this at adoption, okay? So we've heard you from the past, all right? And that's why we're doing it tonight, even though it's not quite complete. And what I said is that I have a few updates in progress because that is something I'm going to present to you next week. In those areas, co-curricular, psychological, because I know Dr. Ryan had said that he wanted to talk about that. That's why this update in progress is here, okay? programs with students with disabilities, because when I met again with special ed, because that's such a huge area, that we have more than one meeting and it's ongoing because new information comes along, right, during this time of year. I have that to revisit. Supervision, because there have been some changes in supervision, and we are prepared to talk about that on Thursday. Insurance, because we got some more information from NYSERD. You know, some of this is, we don't have all the information at a certain time, and there is a timing issue, right? We still don't know what state aid is, right? So I try to do it as much in advance, but I have to have these caveats with the board in that it isn't quite complete. So I try to talk about things that we know about, like health insurance, like pension funds, okay, contractual increases, and leave some of the other to later, and legal. I had a request from a board member to take another look at legal, and we did. So I'm going to present that next week as well. Aside from that, you should have everything else. So aside from what I had just mentioned, you will have everything next week, and then the 12th, again, is a highlights presentation, just highlights, okay?
Okay.
And thank you for your presentation, it was wonderful as always.
Thank you.
Where are we?
Any more questions from the board?
Questions and comments from the public on tonight's agenda? Mr. Avenari.
Good evening, Michael Avenari, 94 Regent Drive. First, I'd like to thank Mr. DeVito. I've seen a bunch of these presentations over the years. They do seem to get better. And I guess you've learned and got better using the PowerPoint, and very informative. And as someone who was involved in the Budget Committee a number of years ago, it's good to see you not drawing on the reserve funds and that you've, as was the plan, got to a sustainable budget. But of course, as a citizen of the district and a taxpayer, I certainly have some questions that have me concerned a little bit about, not so much with the budget, I understand the general aspect of it, but more along with, which is agenda item number 9, about the $25 million fund for the capital project. So let me, if I could ask one question before going. So the general budget cap is 2%, and then you could theoretically get up to about another 2.1% for the capital project. So what are the $2 million, the capital projects that are being done next year that allows you to go over the cap?
Thank you for your question. First part, the capital project that we have slated for the 18-19 year is the replacement of all of the windows on the first floor at West School. It's something that we've been talking about for a couple of years, that we met in the capital project subcommittee, and when Ms. Broner and Mr. Meninsky and a couple of other district administrators met to prioritize the capital needs, we said that this was a project that we were going to do in the 2018-19 year. We started talking about this 2 years ago, way before anything having to do with parkland, right? Because we knew that it was important to address the safety concerns at West School and replace those windows. Not only are they clouded because of wear and tear over the years, where it's hard to see and they're not very clear, but we need to make them safer. So it's going to cost about $963,000, right? We had our architect go out and spec it out 6-8 months ago, maybe even actually time goes by a year ago now, and that is in the budget for next year. That extra $963,000 plus $10,000 for an additional storage unit at Nike, small, is in the budget. That $973,000 allows us $973,000 more of levy. It's pretty close to a dollar for dollar, okay? That probably would take us from the 2% to, let's say, a 3%, right? Because the tax cap is it's 2%, that gives you another percent. That other 1.1%, and I'm sorry that you missed the prior presentation when I talked about this, has to do with something called the tax-based growth factor. The fact that our community is elevating our homes and taking bungalows or taking ranches and making them 2- and 3-story homes now has increased our assessed value as a community and actually increased our tax base, okay? What the tax cap formula allows is now you can levy more. So conceptually, it really was designed for more homes being built. So if you're in a community and you have 100 new homes, Now you have 100 new families to spread the tax levy among. That's not our case. What our case is, we've changed the quality of the homes. It's not the quantity, but it's the quality. So now let's say that $300,000 or $400,000 home now is worth $800,000, okay? That now allows us to levy more. And I'm mindful of that, but mindful of the fact that that tax-based growth factor, the highest, I think, in Nassau County, it went up to 4.1. I'm not advocating for that because I am mindful of the impact on the taxpayer. But what I am advocating for is sustainability. And I'm advocating for keep our reserve, keep our fund balance for a year that may be coming up in the next couple when we don't have a tax-based growth factor of 2%. Okay, and I am sensitive and I have compassion for the taxpayer in terms of the 2% versus the 3.4% levy. But as in my job in the district, I feel it's my duty to put that 3.4% as being responsible.
The only question I have about that is you talk about the sustainability of not giving, so in a way, I understand the process, but in a way, you're using the capital project to pad the ability to raise the tax levy. And that's, whether, it's advisable or not, I don't know, but that troubles me a little bit as a process, that you're doing that.
So let me answer that.
Does it make sense what I'm
It
saying?
does. So in the following year, if we don't want to do a capital project and we take that money out of the budget, let's say we could take that out, we lose levy. It has a dollar for dollar. So then if the cap is 2%, then we go to a 1% cap because it is sensitive to whether the community needs it or not. So if we had a certain level and then we don't have that capital exclusion anymore, our levy gets lower than what the tax, whatever the consumer price index
I know it's
is.
like a Rubik's Cube. and I
Yeah,
appreciate
it is.
The district has,
Yeah.
in the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, kept the levy pretty low. So, my next question is on this capital improvement plan for about $25 million.
Uh-huh. And can I just stop you for 1 second?
Sure.
All it says, and it's important, I just want to be clear, it allows for us to create a reserve fund, a capital reserve, up to that. Okay, it's the same thing that the board had done 11 years ago when they created a capital reserve fund, allowing it to go up to 25 million. It only got, I think, as high as 7, maybe 8 million 10 years ago, over the course of 10 years. Now we have about 2.8 million in it. Okay, we don't have the ability to put any more money in it. So what I'm just asking the board to do, again, being fiscally responsible, is to say we don't have the ability to put any money in a capital reserve fund because we don't have a fund any longer that we can input money into. We don't lose the money that we have, but we can't add to it. Create a new capital reserve fund. The board can decide whether it wants to contribute to it or not. The only limit is it's 10 years of time to contribute, and it can only go up to 25 million. But it's certainly, and I don't want anybody to be under any false impressions that we're advocating to put 25 million in, to do it now, or to do it at any time. It just, those are the guidelines. It's for 10 years of contributing and only to a max of 25 million. All I'm saying is have a vehicle, Board of Education, have a vehicle so that if there are capital needs in the future, you have a means to address them.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and I'm not against capital improvements where necessary. I guess the only thing is, when I first read that, it looked like you were, if you do the math over 10 years and 25 million, it's $2.5 million a year. And I understand the surplus is the money at the end of the fiscal year that's not spent.
Correct.
So, like I said, again, as a taxpayer, you always want to keep the level, and I understand that. But, if you have $2.5 million in excess in a particular year, that means you got lucky and whatever. But the taxpayer, somewhere has to, not get overtaxed, balancing the needs of the district, and I understand it. So it's clear, but it's not so clear from this, the proposal, and whatever you're going to put in the budget. So I certainly, whatever you said tonight, certainly clarified it. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I thank you for your question. If there's anything that we can do, maybe Mr. Little, if you can take another look at the language in that resolution, because I think that's what goes into the proposition. Maybe there's a way that we can make it more clear so that the public doesn't think that we are going to be putting in 2.5 million each year, because we're certainly not going to have that kind of a surplus at the end of at least this year or the next year. It just allows for that as a max, and even if we put in 100,000 at the end of a particular year, it's 100,000 more towards our goal of at least the most immediate need is a $4 million new building over at transportation. So some way or another, if we can get to, whatever we have left in the last capital reserve and whatever the board can contribute over the next few years to at least address that need of a $4 million. And then after that, so be it. But I certainly don't want anyone to think that we're creating a budget that's going to allow for $2.5 million over the next 10 years, because that's not what it is.
That's what it looks like. You have to break,
I
as a
appreciate
lawyer,
the
you have
question.
to break through the
Yeah.
legalese and perhaps have
Yeah.
an explanatory paragraph of what you just said.
Yeah.
Because looking at this at first blush, it sure looked like that's what you want to do based on strictly on math and what it says.
Thank you. And just to say, as I do the budget presentations after adoption, I will certainly stress that when I go to all the PTA meetings at all the schools and when I go to all the civic associations, because I certainly want to be clear.
It may not pass like this.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I just have a quick question. Annie Conway, 119 Audrey Drive. I was here a month ago, I think it was a month ago, and we mentioned air conditioning for the schools. So I'm not hearing anything about that, and I think that's something very important to note, because if you go to each school or if you go to the middle school, it's extremely stifling for the children when they're inside the classrooms. So we're talking about, I know we're talking about the West School, those windows, it's for safety reasons, but I feel that an air conditioning unit inside the schools is also a health condition, because you have many students who do suffer from asthma and other medical issues. And if you go up to East on a June day, you can't concentrate. The children are all running into the library if possible to get some air, because it's stifling in there. So I would like to know if that is anywhere near the budget at all.
At this point, it's not in the budget, and I'll explain two things related to that. Over the past year, we repaired all of the windows at East School. Now, we put in new windows a few years ago, but they were hard for the staff members to open. So we spent the money, we brought in a contractor, and we repaired the windows, so now they're easy to raise. That should help. Last year, the board put in fans in every classroom, okay? That should help. If the board, I'm just saying, now that we haven't had a June yet with the fans or the ability to open the windows. So I'm going to suggest to the board, you have a choice. You can wait and see if the fact that now fans are here this June, they weren't in last year, and the fact that the windows can open more easily and have cross ventilation, which we didn't have, and see how it is. Or we are going to have to find it's expensive to put air conditioning in the building. And it's something this is something the board would need to consider before April 12th.
Just as a point of clarification, we did raise it when we went through capital projects, right? I think it was in the fall, and it's East School not only in June, but it's in September as well.
I was going to say that.
Sometimes it's worse in September than it is in June. And even the open windows don't make a difference, a significant difference.
There is no air.
So I think in terms of the capital projects, we did go over these in terms of that. In terms of the committee, the priority was given to, I guess, West School windows and others that were
Correct.
deemed more important. But once again, I guess we need to consider it going down in terms of this. I just made the point years ago that in one other district where I had been, there were these kind of little units that were put in each of the buildings. I didn't think that the cost was all that prohibitive, otherwise I know this district wouldn't have done it. But they seem to resolve the issue in some
I
of the
know
buildings.
when I asked Mr. Leahy about it, I think they call them split units, he did have a problem installing them in some of the classrooms. And I'm sorry that I can't remember exactly what that is,
Yeah.
but he did say that he would be in favor of it for some mechanical and operational reasons. But what I can do is I can go back and ask them again to price it out. So you have a price to air conditioning, what kind of air conditioning it would be, and the board can certainly consider it. So then you have a choice. Now, if I'm not mistaken, and please check on this, if they want to use capital reserve money, we'll have to figure out when you have to make that decision. Because the reason why it's on the agenda tonight is there's a certain amount of time where we need to publish it in the newspaper so that we comply with state regulations. So if there's another meeting and we end up using, because we do have some capital reserve money that we can use. Otherwise, we would then have to add money to the budget, okay? And then we'd have to figure out, well, certainly the cap would go up, right? Because now we're adding more capital dollars. You don't have to go up. You can use reserve money because it's a one-time expenditure. So that is another option. If we didn't have have the amount of time to advertise and use our capital reserve, we could use fund balance to pay for the air conditioning as a one-shot, but we would just have to increase the budget. And now our cap goes from, let's say, a 4.1 to maybe a 5. Doesn't mean you have to go to a 5. We'd use our fund balance for this one shot. So that is something, but that would be your use of fund balance, and that's something the board can consider.
I just want to let Mrs. Conway know that we did take her
Oh, yes, we should talk
position
about it.
seriously.
Yeah.
It did go through the committee, and it did go through the capital improvements, and you can imagine a district this size, the number of capital improvements that were raised, and you try to be as equitable or as Solomonic as you can in terms of making the disposition. But I guess the point I want to make is that we haven't lost sight of it, and we'll continue to be mindful of this, because we do know the situation at Easton and some of the other schools in terms of just how tough it makes learning.
It makes learning
Yeah.
extremely difficult for the little ones. Thank you. Maybe some type of 5-year plan where you could actually put it in and organize it so it's not just thrown about, it's kind of put in more.
Do you have any idea how many days per year we're talking about that we would need? I do recall this coming up because I have here it was October 12th that we had the meeting about the capital projects when we talked about it. And I had made a note before we fix the chairs, the seats in the Mandela Auditorium, we need to talk about air conditioning plan. So I'm not sure how that.
I don't know, you'd have to look, because I remember September to November, it's more like an Indian summer anymore. So there really isn't much, it's really not cool, and it used to be cool. It's not anymore.
See, it's not just east though, it's east and it's west,
Yes.
and it's the middle schools, right?
Right.
The middle school's not, is there all that new construction without air conditioning in there?
From
Middle school at night.
I remember parent teacher comments.
It's stifling.
So it's not just one building, and we couldn't say, okay, well, let's do east and west,
Right.
we won't do, and middle school we won't do.
There would have to be some type of plan involved, but
Right.
it's really is something that you should think about and put into some type of organized plan, because you're expecting students to sit there in a classroom and learn, but if they're sweating, if it's stifling, they can't. Administrators, you all have air conditioning in your rooms because you can't concentrate when it's too hot. How do you expect the little ones or even the middle schoolers to do it?
So, Mrs. Conway, I just want to let you know that there is a 5-year capital plan. We presented it about a year and a few months ago. It's on the website. So just as a point of record that it is on the website. Air conditioning is not in it.
It's not on it though.
But I'm just saying, it's not, I'm just saying it's not on it because, as Dr. Ryan said, we have a limited amount of dollars. And what we did was we prioritized based on what we had, and I said the capital fund, what we had wanted to use from the capital reserve, and what we thought was reasonable to put in the budget each year. Now, we can certainly revisit it, we can certainly continue conversation, but I just want to let you know that is something that was considered. Unfortunately, it just didn't make it to that plan, but the board could always reconsider it.
And because learning really is why we're all here. We're all here for the children.
Mrs. Conway, I have brought this up every single year for many years now, and Mr. DeVito knows that every time I walk through the schools, I say the same thing. East School had, at one point, no fans in every single room. We made sure that they had fans in every single room. But it's very difficult when your windows, you don't have the cross ventilation north and south. So like Lindell is on the water, so they have a better circulation of air. East, it was stifling on the second floor when I was up there. It was awful. And I have had this conversation with Mr.
Well,
DeVito many
again,
times.
now we have fans, and we
We
didn't
do
have
have
fans,
fans, I
and
understand.
we fixed the windows. And
Right.
I'm just suggesting that we may want to see if that makes a difference before we spend whatever it is to spend and put in air conditioning. Now, we can certainly do it.
I
you
understand,
know.
but I also had a conversation with you about those split units.
And like I said, Mr. Leahy said it wouldn't work. I'm sorry, I just don't remember the reason
Yeah, well,
tonight, but I can certainly
figure out why.
ask him
Mr.
again.
DeVito, can I just point out, and Mrs. Conway also, when you install, excuse me, air conditioning in an existing structure, it's going to cost you 2 to 3, maybe 4 times more than putting it in a brand new building. And that's the problem we're faced with.
You don't want to put in all new school buildings, though, do you?
No, administration, the reason why administrators have air conditioning The
No, I-
administration building is a new building.
So does every principal office?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm thinking about the fans, and I'm thinking about little kids. How do you know that that fan, I mean, is the fan up in the
It's up-
sky
yeah,
where
it's
the
up
little
high.
kid can't stick their
Yeah,
finger
it's
in
way
it?
up high, I couldn't reach it.
Okay.
And I'm
Which is
not
the same as
Because that's something I'm thinking of, little kids going, oh, can I stop and
No,
tap
no,
my
no, no.
finger? So thank you for listening to me, but there is one more thing, the high school clubs, I have 2 high schoolers. It's really difficult to get into some type of club, so if they're very difficult. You hear about one club, but then it's not meeting, and then possibly it's meeting, but it's really not meeting. And then there is a key club, but there's not a key club. So there's mass confusion with the students regarding the clubs. Not the sports. Everybody knows when the sports are, which is great. Not the theater, because kids know when the theaters are, but it's
So
like,
the schedule online is not correct?
it's not accurate, not at all, no. And it's not high school friendly.
Has it been brought to Mr. Meyer's attention?
I don't know, I told my kids to bring it up, but I don't know if they
Has
did
it
or
been
not.
brought to PTSA or?
Yes,
It
I
has
have,
been.
I have mentioned that, yes. So that's just something I'd like to mention.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, presentations of the interim. More order on it?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Mr. Vada?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
Items 8 and 9 together?
Motion made. Second. Any discussion? Call for a vote. Mrs. Bagney?
Yes.
Mrs. Verona?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yeah, I just want to thank Mr. Abneri for bringing that up, and hopefully we'll get a resolution in terms of this. More clear to the constituents. Yes.
Yes. And I vote yes.
And items 10 through 15 together?
A motion?
Yes. Motion.
Second. Any discussion?
Yeah, I don't believe there are any, other than item 12, I don't think there are any CSE or CPSE.
Okay. I didn't even say.
Oh, I apologize. No,
13?
apologize.
12.
13 here, okay. Which is 13?
It's 13.
Okay, all but CSE and CPSE.
So then, why don't we-
As amended.
As amended.
Yeah, it is amended. Okay, Mrs. Stagny?
Yes.
Mrs. Verona?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes?
Yes. And I vote yes. What's next? Any old and new business?
Yeah, I have a question concerning Saturday morning enrichment. I just would like to have a statement in terms of how that went this year. Enrollment, I hope it's not one of these programs that just rolls over because it starts and ends in terms of, is it self-sustaining? Do the children come? Is it a service worth providing? I'd like some information concerning Saturday morning,
So,
now that
yeah.
it's over.
Yes, yes, and yes to all 3 of those. As you know, this year we had a new coordinator, and we would not have run the program if we had not had the enrollment to sustain it and cover it, make it self-sustaining. We did eliminate some course offerings that were not well enrolled enough to pay the teacher. That being said, I think it was the most successful that we've had in a long time. The new coordinator brought a whole new perspective to it, a new life to it. She revamped some of the course offerings, and I actually think that I got feedback from some parents directly that it was very well run and very well appreciated by the parents of the community. So I think it's something that we can actually grow, Dr. Ryan, but in my mind, it is something that is self-sustaining or doesn't run.
I know we've always had a discussion about this, Mr. DeVito, in terms of whether it was self-sustaining or not. Is it?
So for a time period, it wasn't.
Right.
And then we were able to kind of change the cost structure. I haven't reviewed it this year to determine whether it is or not, but I know it's certainly closer to self-sustaining than it was. I just haven't reviewed it.
And how many children are engaged in the program?
I believe there are about 100 this year.
100. How many staff?
5?
5. Ish.
I just don't remember.
I don't want to extend the evening, but on your point, for years, we were told that it was self-sustaining. And now I'm finding out for the first time that there were years that it wasn't.
I do know that the classes are self-sustaining, so if they're run at full capacity or whatever it is to pay for the cost of the instructor, that's what I was told was self-sustaining.
That's right.
All right, so what's not self-sustaining?
There are certain administrative costs, Mr. Malinsky, that over the years, at times they did break even and at other times they didn't. But I know that several years ago, we changed the cost structure to get it much, much closer to sustainability. And I just couldn't tell you for this year whether it is or not. But several, I don't know, maybe 5 or so years ago, it wasn't. But then we changed the cost structure, we changed the way it was being administered.
Okay, I know you're busy with the budget, but as soon as the budget is over, I want a complete breakdown and see if it was self-sustaining. And I'd like to know, I know we voted on what the staff made and everything, but I'd like a complete breakdown if possible.
I can actually give you that right away. I have all that information.
Okay, thank you.
More importantly for me, I'd like a discussion of the program. I think rather than just seeing it on the docket and voting for the teachers and their per hourly rate, I do think each year we should look at the program in terms of, I'm glad to hear that this year it seemed to be more robust than in years past, and thanks to the new coordinator for whatever energy or whatever miracle she's worked. But I do think in terms of accountability, we need to look at this program because it tends to slide away, and I think we need to keep it in focus.
I'm just going to say, we allow our school buildings to be used all summer at very minimal cost as a service to the parents of the school district, because the kids go to camp there and they have fun. I haven't been around Saturday morning enrichment a long time, but it was always a lot of fun, and the kids really enjoyed it, and the moms did too. We would get there early to pick our kids up so we could hang out. So, self-sustaining. I've also asked these same questions, and when it's been said to be self-sustaining, I want that. But we have to remember that sometimes there are issues other than finances involved with our children. I just have 2 questions. Number 1, and I really, really need this, Mr. DeVito. I've been asking, it feels like for a long time, for a food services update. I know that next week we're going to talk about transfers to other funds, and it would be really nice if before that meeting I knew where we stood in terms of not just what you want to put in the budget for next year, but where we stand this year with food services.
Right, so I can tell you that the Trojan yogurt has made a big difference in the average daily percentage. And if you'd like some figures, I can share that with you now, but that was part of next week's presentation. But I have some of that.
Will I get it get it tomorrow? I don't need it tonight, I'll get it tomorrow. Am I getting it tomorrow?
You'll get it tomorrow.
Okay, great. Okay.
May I just interject here, Mr. DeVito, if you were able to bring some yogurt here too.
I
I'm
asked
sure
for-
Mrs. Verona would really enjoy that as well.
I asked for yogurt.
Well, that was my surprise for next week.
Ah.
Sample school.
Okay, my other question is, I know that several months ago, and I don't even remember what committee it was on, we talked about getting, it was the policy committee, we talked about getting these vaping monitors in the bathroom so that someone in the office would see that there was vaping going on, and they would be able to run down there and discipline the child or children involved. Now, I do know that the wiring for those devices went up.
Yes, they did. They did.
Okay, are the actual devices up?
Middle school and high school. I know they were working on it this week. I'll have to exactly find out if they're fully functioning.
Okay.
But I know that we gave them the green light to go ahead in the high school and the middle school.
Okay, I can tell you that twice I've received pictures of a bathroom at the high school showing the wiring, like literally pulled out of the wall. So I'm
And
hoping
that
that when we
was
put them
happening
up,
too, yeah.
we're gonna put like some kind of a cage around them so that the kids,
So when we had this conversation at a meeting, it was last week, maybe even 2 weeks ago, I had asked our facilities group if they could do something to recess the device so that it would be hard, or some sort of a cage, like you said.
Okay.
Mr. Epstein, if you have any more information, are they all up and operational?
So, there's been, there's two issues here, okay? One is the company that we've ordered them from has updated them. So they've asked us not to install them because their software has been upgraded. They're gonna give us new ones, okay? So they've asked to upgrade them, okay? So that's been a delay with them. What you saw, what you saw was, the wiring, okay, was originally, and again, I didn't see them, so I can only tell you what I was told by the staff, by the technology, was put on the outside of the ceiling, okay? That was a mistake, okay? So yeah, exactly, but you know, you find this out, this is not uncommon with these things, okay? Keeping in mind that we are on a 30-day trial of these things that are not cheap, so we're gonna use them when we get them and to see if they're valuable, okay? They're just a piece of this puzzle, as I explained last night. So they're under the ceiling, pulled down, right? So that's one piece of it all. So the next thing with the company is that you get text messages, right? So they were ready to be installed in the middle school until the company found out that there's a glitch in the system, and the ones that was slated to go in one of the bathrooms was texting 1,400 texts in 2 days. There was a problem with that, obviously. No one wants to get 1,400 texts on their phones. Can you imagine what that? So somehow, they're upgrading that. Okay, so when we hear all these, that's what the problem is. So now they're going to be sending us the upgraded software on Monday. The company we purchased them from is sending us a technician to work to make sure the middle school ones are operational. Okay, technology is not my game, but this is what they told me. So they're going to put them up on Monday. At the high school, as Mr. DeVito said, the feedback we got from the other school districts who only put in the average of 1, we have 6, okay, so we've invested in these, that they were pulling them down. So Mr. DeVito suggested to Mr. Leahy that he's worked with them to form a cage. They're organizing the cage, they're ordered, they will put them up in the high school. It's a little delay, a combination of, and then the 4 that they sent were sent broken. Okay, so they are sending them on Monday. So it's been out of our control, which is why we haven't really updated them. We ordered them, but we didn't want to commit to something until we knew they were operational. So that's the status of them. Then once they get put in, then we will monitor the school. We'll monitor the building administration with central office. We'll see if they're valuable. And if they're not valuable, if they're being ripped off, we do not have off the wall. We do not have to buy them. They're costing, I want to say, about $600 or $700 each. So you made a significant investment in these. I'll get you the exact cost, but I'm not exactly sure. So you don't want to buy them if they're going to be ripped off the wall every other day. You want to we'll just not use that technique. So that's the status.
I didn't realize we had a vaping issue at the middle school. I thought it was only at the high school.
Huge. Yeah,
Really?
huge.
Oh, my goodness.
And my athletic directors meeting, it's been, it was a discussion as part of the health, because it is a issue, I would guess across the country, but I can tell you in Nassau and Suffolk County. And, but
That's it.
Okay. Teachers Association.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the board. Just want to congratulate you this evening on being able to secure and award tenure to your administrators this evening. And I wish you the same good fortune as you go for your superintendent and additional administrative searches. Have a good evening. Look forward to seeing you all again next Thursday.
Bonnie?
I use my time.
There's somebody here from BSCA, PTA.
Jackie Millicent, Marie Buffalo Revenues, County PTA. On on behalf of PTA, we also, I know they're not here anymore, but that's okay, we also congratulate the administrators awarded tenure this evening. We've had the opportunity to work with each and every one of them for quite a long time, and we appreciate their support of PTA. Those four individuals in particular are just fantastic, so we're very happy to congratulate them. And PTA also would like to thank Mr. DeVito, as usual, for these presentations, which are lots of information, lots to digest, but very good, and we appreciate all that you do with those. And we know that the sustainability piece was an issue or concern of PTA for quite a while now, so it's great to hear that we are in that direction now. And that's really, we don't really have that going on right now, so thank you, have a great evening, everyone.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.